It's absolutely fantastic to be here with you today. The Augmented Instruments Lab and Queen Mary music research in general is super interesting for me. And we have been collaborating so much with you in the past. We even have a magnetic resonator piano in Iceland that we are using, and it's just fantastic. We use the Bella technologies a lot as well. And all the theoretical output of your team is just fantastic. So it's really exciting to be with you. It's funny to say, I was just reflecting on it, sitting outside just earlier. To be with you nowadays means sometimes to be on Zoom. And I wish I was with you there in Mile End in London. It's always nice to visit the lab, but I just wanted to show you that I'm actually in Norway. I'm doing a Viva in Oslo in a few days, but I'm currently in a residency in Lofoten in the north of Norway, and I'm just showing you a little bit that there is another world up here in the north of the Arctic, where the air is clean and the birds are singing, and it's fresh and nice. And yeah, it's funny how the world changes with post-COVID and Zoom technologies and all that, and just how fantastic it is to be with you from distance but still present, somehow. It's fantastic. So what I'm gonna do, hopefully, to talk for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we spend the rest of the hour having a chat. And I'm really interested in the work that you guys are doing. So I hope it can be, a platform for discussion rather than a kind of unidirectional kind of me talking about work all the time. But yeah, to give you the background, I am a professor at the University of Sussex, where I've been based for many, many years, and I've run some research projects there, collaborated with people across the UK and internationally on all kinds of projects, particularly in live coding and in the field of NIME. But a few years ago, I applied for an ERC grant that resulted in setting up a lab at the Iceland University of the Arts. The lab is called Intelligent Instruments Lab. That's the name of the project, the Intelligent Instruments. And here we're interested in what it means that our physical instruments start to learn about ourselves or have some kind of agency that kind of contributes to the way we perform on the instruments and becomes more like a conversational partner in the music making, as opposed to just this kind of prosthesis of the body, an extension of the body. It becomes more of something that we're constantly faced with, thinking about what is it doing, what is happening here. A bit like when we deal with other people, children, animals, or some systems that have agency. And AI in musical instruments is nothing new, but what we're interested particularly in understanding in this project is how the language around musical instrument changes with this new addition. What kind of discourse is created, and what kind of philosophical frameworks develop when we engage with technologies with agency. So the project is about developing the instrument, but it's also about understanding how our ideas of instruments change with this drastic change in new musical instruments. When we say AI, the typical thing is to think nowadays, oh, machine learning. But for us, it's not only machine learning. I mean, there's so much AI, I mean, technologies, artificial life, genetic algorithms, good old-fashioned AI, Markov chains, or all kinds of things that are still interesting in the zone of computational creativity or creative AI. Machine learning, of course, is just this statistical method, and what we're trying to figure out is to look through the hype a little bit as well, particularly if we're thinking about novel creation or new ways of creating. We really have to think and question how machine learning, what is it really that it does? If indeed it is just statistical methods learning on past examples, where is it that it can help us to push music further, to open up new dimensions and so on. And there are various ways in which that can be done, and that is happening, as you all know. But I think we have to be careful also to don't fall completely for the hype of deep learning and all these things that are really exciting at the moment. But I'm sure in 10-15 years time there will be other really exciting things, whether that is, I don't know, quantum computing or Neuralink plugged into our brain, connecting with our instruments or whatever. Technology is kind of evolving so fast, and the excitement you can see if you follow the proceedings of 9, and then the next thing happens, and the next thing, and so critical kind of approach to all these technologies. And indeed, intelligence and intelligent instruments, what is it really? I mean, what is intelligence? That's up for grabs, the definition of what intelligence is in an instrument. Of course, the notion of an instrument is also something we can question. So this is how the project is built up. It's built up in 3 work packages, and we have the first work package where we're developing instruments. We're kind of looking at the relationship between the self and the instrument, kind of this phenomenological relationship with the performer and the instrument, and we're trying to understand how they perceive the instruments in terms of practice, composition, and performance. How does intelligence and instruments change this notion of an instrument and that relationship? In the second work package, it becomes more a sociological approach. We're looking at how the instruments are put into use on stage, in workshops, in kind of by composers and performers. And we have a PhD student starting this autumn that will focus particularly on that. And here we're thinking of, performers and music in general, and also the audience. How do audience members perceive instruments that are kind of novel, and what is the perception of agency in these instruments? And the third work package is a bit of a jump into the unknown, as the ERC likes. They like high risk, high gain research. And the hypothesis here is that we can use musical instrument to study scientific data. Musical instruments have always been epistemic tools. They've always been technologies for understanding the world. You can just start by looking at Pythagoras, who is one of our first mathematicians and philosophers. He was, of course, very interested in the string, and he was dividing the strings with rational numbers, creating scales, musical scales, and so on. So we have this tradition from Pythagoras to what we are all doing today. And that's really what the third work package is about, and we're looking forward to kind of sonified data through physical interfaces. Yeah, so these are the research questions. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but you can see how the first work package focuses on the individual sense of body and self, how you acquisition skill with new instruments, how composition and performance change with creative AI, how we build performer understanding of a musical instrument that evolve and learn under their hands. The second work package, then the sociological work package, focuses on how intelligent instruments affect our artistic and social engagement and community. What is the experience of working with AI in music? How do we delegate agency to technology? And how can artistic practice contribute to a mixed sociology of humans and creative AI? And then the third work package is more this kind of intelligent instruments as epistemic tools for scientific inquiry. I've written a lot about instruments as epistemic tools in the past, and I'll give you a little bit of a background of that now, and then look further into how this. So first, I want to talk a little bit about our first experiment in the lab, because I found that, and that's the topic of our NIME paper this summer. We were interested in, like Pythagoras, we were interested in this string, you know, in the kind of monochord, trying to see how we could build from the primary elements of simple elements like the string. And we have been using the Halldóraphone. Halldór Ulfarsson, who many of you know, is the instrument maker in this project. So we were interested in feedback. We were interested in, you know, string going into a bella, going in with some intelligence in it, going through signal processing, and going back into the instrument through a resonator or a speaker, transducer on the body of the instrument. And when we started looking into that, we found an Icelandic instrument. Well, some of us knew it, but others in the lab got really excited about it. It's called the langspil. It's a traditional instrument. And funnily enough, the NIME conference this year is about decolonialization, and there is a history with this instrument in Icelandic traditional music, where in the past it was just intonation system built on indigenous scales, but in later centuries they started tuning it to equal temperament in chromatic scales, you know, to be able to support the kind of new proper scientific music of the European classical tradition. So what we're trying to do is to go a little bit back in history, and we've been working with people. We've been, some of you know Jack Armitage, of course. Here he is playing one of the instruments that we have made. This is the pro langspil, as we call it. You can see the frets on the neck can be moved up and down, so you can tune it onto any scales that you want. But you can also see 3 pickups under each of the strings. The pickups go into, the bala, which is in the box, and there's a transducer underneath the board that is underneath the string. So we get really a feedback system here that is really exciting to play, and it's really a marvel to behold the kind of difference in the behavior of the instrument depending on what kind of software we load onto the bella. It really changes character. It really transforms, and it's been interesting to give this instrument to people and get their perception of how they feel about an instrument that is constantly changing, that can evolve in some of the patches we have machine listening and so on. So that's been a really good kind of project. You can see behind Jack on the picture, there's furniture that we built, and that furniture is made for actually become musical instruments as well. You can put strings between these frames and things to it. So we really see everything in the lab as a kind of dynamical, modular kind of assemblage, or it has the potential of setting up small assemblages to study musical instruments. So yeah, I'm interested in, I mean, the core of this is that something strange is happening in 21st century music. You know, we're moving from wood to electricity to, you know, plastic or digital. You know, it's the acoustic, electric, and the digital. And as I kind of look into and explain in my book, I kind of look into the genealogy of the digital and how many of the things that we see in digital systems today could actually have been done with pen and paper in earlier age. I mean, algorithmic music was already done in the 17th century. There were people working with combinatorics, mathematical combinatorics in the 17th and 18th century. And a lot of that resulted in generative algorithmic music. Exciting to kind of look into this genealogy of digital systems and try to trace them back into history. That's what my book is about. But what then happens, that's the fourth section of my book, is how digital music really transforms all the conventions that we've built up in the past centuries. So it really transforms the roles of composers, interpreters, instruments, works, audience. The technology is really changing. So you know, you can now perform over distance, you can perform over time. You have machine learning, creative AI, and so on. So it transforms tradition as well, which is the slowest transformation, really. I mean, we still have countries in Europe that are supporting, you know, things like opera houses and so on with incredible amount of money, where centuries old music is being performed and played. And then you have smaller experimental spaces with people doing contemporary experimental music, and they receive no funding. Like, I mean, the Dalston, what is it, Otto? No, what is it called? The venue in London.
Cafe Otto.
Huh?
Cafe Otto.
Cafe Otto, that's the one. Yeah. I mean, I really question the amount of money that sometimes goes into the kind of old music, and why there isn't a better support into what is actually happening today. That's related to tradition here. And then, of course, we look into education. What are we teaching? What are the conservatories doing? What are music departments doing? You know, and then, of course, how do we enjoy music? What has changed? And you all know about the beauty of things like Spotify, but also the problems it poses with all kinds of, you know, algorithms and playlists and virtual, you know, fake artists and so on, and bad musician deals, really. So what I've been looking at is the material, the symbolic, and the signal. So material, that's the instruments. How do we inscribe music into instruments? The symbolic, how do we inscribe music into music theories or rules or notation? And then the signal, what is phonography? How do we inscribe music into a signal, whether that is an analog signal of the vinyl or digital signal, and so on. So how do these all these technologies transcribe into digital technologies? And that is a field called organology, and I'm interested in. I mean, it's funny. Organology is the word used for the study of musical instruments. The Greek word for instrument is a tool, is also an organ. A hammer is an organ. A musical instrument is an organ, and a heart is an organ. You know, as you know, we even have many of these words also in English. But for Stiegler, he was the head of IRCAM at one point. He's a philosopher, and he then came up with a general organology, where he's looking at how humans produce artificial organs. Those are our technological devices, our mobile phones or our ukuleles. And he's then interested in how we learn to practice these artificial organs. What are the kind of ways in which we extend our bodies and our mind with these artificial organs? And then how we institute them. You know, what are the institutions, the social organizations that we create around these kind of organs, and all that constitutes what he calls organology. And I'm interested and inspired by this organology of his, because it doesn't focus only on the instrument. It takes a much broader view of organology. So I'm just going to go quickly through the sections here, but just so you know the background of what I'm thinking with the recent work in our lab. But it's basically that we inscribe music into instruments. For example, in this picture of that 40,000-year-old flute that many of you know, the way that the holes are and the location of the holes in this bone is really formalizing the music theory of the people who lived in that cave. It is also, it's a constant. It's like the meter that is kept in some museum in Paris, you know, it's a constant that we refer to. So when people would die and be, you know, other people born in that cave, there would still be this technical object lying around that would kind of keep the reference to their music theory, you know. It wouldn't just be the voice, kind of ephemeral and changing over time, but there was this technical object that kept the music because we had inscribed the music into it. This is what Stiegler calls grammatization. You are putting into technical objects the things that the values, the musical values, and so on. Then we have symbolic inscriptions. How do we inscribe our music into, well, let's say on paper, you know, it can be, of course, code or whatever, but it's systems that are not music and are not music itself and not musical instruments. And then we have signal inscriptions, like I talked about, which is kind of a type of notation, but it's notation for machines and not humans. And then we have digital writing, and that's really where we're trying to look into. So with all these things, what is really new maybe is the capacity for machine listening. As I said before, a lot of the things that we could do in the past, that we can do now on a computer could have been done in the past, except for what we're now seeing with machine listening and machine learning. I mean, any prescriptive algorithm, some if statements and random numbers or whatever, you could come up with a system to generate algorithmic music with dice, or looking at where raindrops fall, or you know, all kinds of systems to create an algorithmic system. But to teach a system by example, that is really new. That is something that we don't see in past practices. And it's perhaps something that our culture hasn't really grasped yet, you know, the implications of teaching a computer by example. And then, of course, you all know the kind of issues around selecting code, of codifying data, of the issues of bias, for example, that goes into these systems. So I'm quite interested then in, well, I'm just going to keep that other slide, I guess. I'm quite interested in how machine learning works in the arts. You can say that machine learning is fantastic for certain problems, you know, in statistics. You have a problem, you have a defined solution, you run the code on some examples, and you can see how well the system performs. That's slightly different in music, because the goal isn't there really, unless you really want to make the music of Bach, for example. Yeah, you can come up with a system that does exactly that. But that's not, I mean, that's more a proof of concept. That's not really artistically viable. I mean, who wants to make exactly the music of Bach now? So where is it that the machine learning can be helpful, and how do we understand and define and develop technologies that can be co-creative and augment our creativity? And what are the things that we can put into such systems, and how do we define them? So in music, we don't know beforehand what is interesting. It's practice based, and we're kind of going into the unknown. We're trying to try things out, and these are things that we cannot so easily define in software design, and the method of selecting the parameters and so on. So in a way, it's really, talking about practice-based research, it's really exciting to be able to augment our instruments with AI, because that's a way in where we can test them out with our bodies, you know, play the system, extend our mind and kind of ideas through a system that we're kind of discovering based on learning. But then the question is, how quickly can we retrain the instrument to get different results and so on? And for us, these are some of the concerns we have, you know, of real-time learning, of learning in different contexts, of people training instruments differently to get different results out of them, and so on, and try to understand how we create the language and kind of musical tradition around that. So if we look at the machine learning today, we have a lot of projects that are just taking MIDI data files, some repositories of MIDI data, and training it on examples, on lots of examples. For example, the LAC data set. We have done a project like that, and it's really fantastic, but it also shows certain limitations. For example, that MIDI files are, as you all know, quite poor format for musical abstraction and inscription. It's basically comprised of notes on and notes off. with a bit of dynamics in it, you know, dynamics in terms of maybe velocity, but there's a pitch shift as well, or control shift, or control data. But a lot of it is, if you look at MIDI files, it's just notes on and notes off in time on separate tracks. So how can that be representative of music, and what do we really get out of that? There's a lot of music that wouldn't fit into this framework of abstracting or defining music. For example, if you think about the didgeridoo, you know, try to represent that on a MIDI file, you know, it's not very exciting. All kinds of drone music, noise music, and so on. There's a lot of musical traditions that really emphasize pitch shifting. So you create the note, or you start a note, and then it's all about the pitch shift. And there are notational traditions that really do that well. For example, in Byzantine or in the traditions around kind of Greco-Turkish area, where they have really refined notational systems for the kind of pitch inflections in a note after it has been triggered. So MIDI causes a problem, and of course, when it was created in the 80s, contemporary composers really thought it was a reactionary system already. You know, there had been so much progress in Western common musical notation that it was actually a shock for them to see how poor the MIDI standard was. But you know, there are reasons for that. It's questionable whether they could really support all the new notations in a standard like MIDI. So I'm just talking about MIDI a little bit here as a kind of way to discuss the codification of conventions that might be the problem when we create machine learning. What are we really listening to? Are we listening to note-offs, note-ons, and note-offs? Is that the thing that we're interested in, or is it some kind of timbre or, you know, spectral data that we're interested in? Is it gestural data that is interesting? Oops, sorry, I'm gonna turn that off. If I took a picture of the phone call, that's good. Yeah, what are the signals that we're listening for? And this is really where I think it'd be interesting to talk with you and hear what you guys are doing. Because how can the machine listening and the machine learning technologies that we have today, how can they really be encoded into something interesting? What are the parameters that we're interested in? What is a musical gesture, for example? You know, if you look at the pianist, what are the things that in their piano playing are important musical gestures? And if you really are going to analyze that, you know, it becomes a bit of a process for you to kind of encode those gestures such that the system can learn from it. So yeah, I should say in the lab we're working with this on 3 levels. Then we are working with machine learning of audio signals. So we're working with a voice artist, and she's doing some really interesting work on her own voice and training a network on that. That has been quite interesting, but it's early stages yet. Then we're working on the symbolic level as well. The first one on the voice is the signal, then the symbolic, that's kind of analyzing events in time, like MIDI files, but it can also be any event, you know, rhythms or gestural events and so on. But then we're also interested in interactive machine learning. So how can we train a network in real time? How can we train and test and train and test, you know, or maybe even have training as part of the performance? So we're kind of changing the instrument as we're performing it. And that's our current kind of project. We're focusing now on the gestural machine learning. I think I would be quite interested now in kind of opening up the discussion. Apart from maybe there is a slide here that I should maybe talk a little bit about. It is that you can see that companies are increasingly looking at subscription models, for example, native instruments. They're turning their software into a subscription model software. And what does that mean? Does it mean that we're really is the company, is the software learning from your use of it? Are they gathering data about your use of the software? Will they be suggesting musical styles that they're detecting algorithmically? And what does this mean even in terms of copyright or ownership? If for example, a musical culture somewhere in the world is developing musical tradition of some sort, whether it's, you know, dubstep in Croydon or whatever, or something else happening in Chile, you know, and then suddenly some algorithms are detecting it and spreading it out as suggestions in the software for other people around the world, you know. These are really strange issues to think about ethics and authorship and authenticity. And it's perhaps something that we as instrument makers should be thinking about as well, you know, the training of these things, or the data that we use, and what it means to people like, to notions of authenticity and authorship and artistic. On the other hand, you know, from the other perspective, we could start to think about the changes that are happening in our general culture into maybe more post-humanity, or post-human perception of the human, where precisely these notions of authenticity and the ego, or the kind of unique personal situation, the maybe enlightenment self, as it's often been called, you know, the ego of the enlightenment, where that is disappearing, and we're starting to see a much more interconnected notion of the human, one where you realize that a lot of your creativity is maybe coming from the tools that you use, coming from the culture you're embedded in, and so on. And that's, of course, a notion that Brian Eno has very clearly stated as a shift from the genius to the scenius. I'm sure you've heard him talk about this, but he's basically thinking about the scene as being the creativity, or the source of creativity, rather than the unique personal self. And that's really where we come in with machine learning and instruments and intelligent instruments, you know, what is the scene? What compromises something that is an assemblage of creativity, you know, that goes beyond the personal artistic kind of signature notion that we've been dealing so much with for 2 centuries only, you know. it hasn't been long that we focused on this artistic ego genius thing. It's from Romanticism and so on and on, but all this is changing now, and I think our current technologies are just driving through that change. You can see a lot of this already encoded in the philosophy of the post-structuralists in the 70s, 60s, but it's now that with our technologies that it's happening through the technologies themselves. So maybe no, I'm not going to show you all this. I just wanted to end on this slide of music as a platform for research. I think this computer is very slow. It says that, yeah. This is a quote to Plato. I end my book on this quote. It's really that when he looks into the etymology of the term music, he sees that it derives from the muses, as we all know, but he goes further and he kind of explains how the muses come from the word muses means to research, to seek, to go into the unknown. And that's really what we're trying to do with our work. So it's a kind of technological investigation. And when I say our work, I'm including you in that our. But I think we really should stop now, or I should stop, and it would be great to have some kind of comments or discussion. And I'd love to hear what you people are working on in this field.